All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Samantha Jameson, and I'm the marketing specialist here at NBS Scientific. And today we are here to present to you a webinar on automated labeling in the lab, which will ultimately culminate into a live demonstration of the Sci-Print VX2 fully automated tube labeler from Scinomix. So a couple announcements before we begin. First, if at any point during the presentation or the demo you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box on the right side of your screen. We will collect all of the questions and then hold them until the end, until our Q&A session, and we'll get through as many as we can at that time. Secondly, if at any point you need to leave early during the presentation or the demo, no need to worry. We are recording this webinar, so we will have a link to share with you, so you can go back and rewatch the parts that you might have missed. We will have that for you by the end of this week. So before we get into the live demo or the presentation, I just wanted to run through the agenda really quickly. So we'd first like to start by discussing some of the pros and cons of some current labeling methods that people are currently using in the lab. And then we'd quickly like to review some of the tube and plate labelers that we have in our portfolio, and then finally walk through a couple customer applications to really showcase how people are currently using this equipment in their lab. And then we'll move into the live demo of the Sci-Print VX2. My colleague Ryan will show us how easy it is to use the software to set up a label, and then also kind of show us the unit in action. And then, as I mentioned before, we will conclude with a Q&A session. So to begin, let's talk about some ways that labs are currently labeling and tracking their samples. So first of all, hand labeling tubes. So this is a very low budget option that could be ideal for very low throughput labs who are only processing a handful of samples per day. But this does come with some disadvantages because if you're labeling tubes with a Sharpie or some kind of marker or a pen and the ink smears or the label gets smudged during storage, then what happens then? Because if you can't read the label or your colleague can't read the label, then you might not remember what's exactly in that tube, which means your samples might at that point become irrelevant and your data might be unreliable. And that might ultimately mean that you'd have to repeat experiments that you've been working on. So there are disadvantages to handwriting labels, but a step up from hand labeling tubes would be to use some sort of portable or desktop printer. So with these kinds of printers, you can ensure a better print quality. So legibility isn't as big of a concern as it might be when hand labeling tubes. Using some kind of portable or desktop printer is also faster than hand labeling tubes. However, this method still has its downfalls because it still requires the manual application of a label. And if labels aren't consistently or precisely put onto a tube, there could potentially be some issues downstream if you are working with a scanner or barcode reader that really needs the labels to be on the tube in a exact location to read any barcode you might have on there. And then finally, a step up from a portable printer would be some level of automation for labeling. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the semi-automated and fully automated labelers that we offer, which are from Scinomix. So with some kind of automated labeler, you can really count on a high print quality and consistent label placement, which are two key components of really tracking your samples well in the lab. You can also count on having more walk-away time, having less labeling errors, and just better sample tracking overall. So as I've mentioned, we offer a range of tube and plate labelers from Scinomix that can really help scale up your workflow and give you the walk-away time that you and your team would need to work on other more important tasks in the lab. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time to go through some of the labelers that we offer. and just talk about some of their features and benefits. So to begin with, we have the Sci-Print NP2 plate labeler, and I'm just going to play some of these videos. Hopefully they work for you all. So the NP2 plate labeler, it's a semi-automated label printer that can print and apply labels to various microteeter plates and deep well blocks. It can be used as a standalone system where you actually manually load the plates onto the plate deck, or it also can be integrated into a fully automated environment. Now the step up from the NP2 would be the NP2 Plus plate labeler. So this is a fully automated plate labeler option. It is a higher throughput, or it has a higher throughput compared to the NP2, which means it offers more valuable walkaway time. The NP2 Plus does include 2 vertical stackers for the loading and unloading of microplates. So the way that this works is that plates are loaded into one stacker, processed on the printing platform so that the plates are then labeled, and then they are moved into the output stacker. And then as shown in the photo on the left, you do have the option to add additional stackers, which can increase the capacity even further. So then moving into some of the tube labeling options that we have. So we offer the Sci-Print Solo, which is a semi-automated tube labeling system that can print and apply labels to a range of tubes and vials from 0.5 ml in size to up to 50 ml in size. Now the Solo can also be used as a standalone unit where you place the individual tubes into the device to be labeled, or as you can see in this video, it can also be integrated into larger automated systems like liquid handling systems. Finally, what we will be demoing today is the Sci-Print VX2 tube labeler. Now, this is a fully automated system that can print and apply labels to the same range of tubes as the Sci-Print Solo. It has a 6-position work deck, which means that it can hold up to 600 tubes, and it has a throughput of about labeling up to 400 tubes per hour. So the VX2 itself is a labeler, but it does have different modules that can be added depending on your lab's specific workflow. So for example, if you needed a barcode reader to read or validate tubes, you can add one of those. If you needed a peristaltic pump to fill tubes with an aqueous solution, you can add one of those as well. Or if you needed some type of bulk feeding system to actually convey your tubes into the inside of the VX2 unit, you can add one of those as well. So then finally, now that we've reviewed some of the tube and plate labelers in our portfolio, we wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the ways in which our customers are currently using these products in the lab. So we have 2 customer applications that we just wanted to touch upon quickly. So one of our customers works with small molecules and does sample analysis via high-performance liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry. They currently have 3 VX2 units, and they initially invested in these units because hand labeling for them was too slow and it wasn't consistent enough. So they primarily work with 2 ml SARSID tubes as well as 1 ml matrix tubes. And the way that their process works is that they start with tubes that are in racks and also capped on the work deck of the VX2. And then they have the VX2 apply a label and then scan to confirm that the correct label was applied to the tube. And then after labeling is complete, some of their tubes go into storage, and then some of their other samples are used for immediate analysis. So this customer does multiple runs a day, and they even do runs overnight. And the biggest benefit from them was the increased throughput and also the increased walkaway time. Another customer application is we have a customer that works on drug development products, and they keep, what they do is they keep small aliquots of each product that they work on and then store those aliquots for the duration of the product. So if for some reason there's some kind of adverse reaction to the product down the road, they can pull those aliquots and do testing on them. And they decided to invest in a VX2 with a VXQ bulk tube feeder. because before, all of their labeling and filling was being done by hand in the lab. So for them, it was purely ROI. So they could save a lot of time and money by automating their labeling and filling process. So then for their process, they start with 1.5 ml and 2 ml Nalgene tubes that are capped. They load those tubes into the bulk tube feeder, which you can see in that picture on the right. The tubes are then conveyed into the VX2 where they are then picked up by the gripper arm of the VX2. They're filled, labeled, and then placed into their subsequent racks on the work deck. And once those tubes are processed and labeled, they are then put into long-term storage. All right, so now that we've talked about a couple customer applications, it's time to move into the live demo of the VX2. So at this time, I'm going to pass things off to my colleague, Ryan Torrance. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, he's going to go through how to set up a label, so show us the Scinomix software, and then we will ultimately see the unit running in action. So Ryan, when you are ready, feel free to share your screen. All right, you're good.
Thank you for the introduction, Sammy. I'll be going over the Scinomix software here and how to set up a label and how to set up a run. So what we can see here is this is the Scinomix software screen that that's gonna open up whenever you open the software. Right now I have a demo set up for us. On the left-hand side here, we can see the run steps that's saying exactly what the unit's gonna do. These can be edited. In this screen here, up top, we have source, actions, and run end. So the source is going to be where the tube's coming from, if it's coming from a rack or if it's coming from a bulk tube feeder like the VX2 or the VXI. We also have the racks specified over here. We're using 1.4 ml micronic racks. These are preset and saved into the unit. You can add different tube types at a later date, and our service technicians can easily walk you through that over the phone, or can come out and do that on site for you. And at the bottom here, it kind of gives you a good to go of, if everything looks fine. So let's say we were using a work list here and we selected work list. Well, we don't have a work list selected, so it's going to give you a warning. But since we're just going to go in run order, we get the good to go down here again. And then we have the actions. So we're going to be printing a label, and the label is coming from a label document, which we can see over here on the right-hand side, and not from a data file. You do have the option to upload a data file on a work list if you choose to do that, and you need to have each tube individually labeled not with the same label. This is also where you would select the label to be labeled. You can save as many as you need to in the label configuration. And once again, we're good to go at the bottom, and the run end. So this is just telling the unit where it's placing the tube after it's been labeled. So we're placing it back in a rack, and everything is good to go. So we can save that, and then we can get into the label document section where you can actually edit and create your labels. So it's very easy to use. It's drag and drop software. You can do pictures, barcodes, or text. Let's say we wanted to rotate this 90 degrees and drag it over here. If you want your if you want your labels oriented horizontally or vertically, we can change this current date or we can change this fixed text into a barcode. And this can also be oriented any way we need it to be. So the software is very easy. There is no limit to how many information fields you can have on there. It's just however many you can fit and however small they need to be so that you can still read them, you can put on there. This is also very easy to use if you're using information from a data field. You orient the fields in the position that you want them, and then there's a very easy CSV file to fill out that's uploaded to the unit with the information that needs labeled. So now we can see our label over here on the right. We can see the run steps. It's taking a tube from the rack, putting it in the roller, which is just where the label is applied at. It's applying the label, removing the tube from the roller, and placing it back in the rack. So now this is where you set up the what tubes are going to be labeled. So we can select all, we can select none, we can select a few throughout. For this purposes, we're just going to go ahead and do a few. And this is the screen that's going to prompt you before before you can go ahead and label. On the right-hand side, we have the top margin, the left margin, and the heat setting. So this is going to be the margin for the labels. It's always good to prime the labeler just to make sure that your label is in the right spot where you wanted it centered, and you can adjust the margins a little bit. The heat setting is, how dark and how crisp the labeling is going to be on the label. So, if you see it's a little bit faded, you can increase the heat settings. 10 is pretty much the highest that we advise to go, though, and you shouldn't have any issues with that. So now we can go ahead and switch over to the webcam and watch the unit in action.
Okay, you're good to go.
So that concludes our run. Molly, do you want to grab a tube out of there and see if we can show them a label, what it looks like? Yeah, so you can see that, it was applied and it's pretty crisp, very easy to read on the tube. And so a few other things to mention, as you can see, let me close this run here. As you can see, we have an SBS footprint rack in there. If you're using tubes that are in an SBS footprint rack, that is completely fine to use. If not, let's say you're using something like a Sarstead tube that doesn't really come in a rack, you can have custom racks made that those can be put in. These are just 3D printed and can be made for a variety of different tube types. We would just need sample tubes to be able to test out functionality. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that label sizes. We do offer a variety of different label sizes for different size tubes. They can be made with a wraparound so that there's, no chance at all of the labels peeling off. You shouldn't have that at all to begin with, though. The labels are chemical and abrasion resistant. They're temperature resistant, down to liquid nitrogen storage. And as long as you're not using anything more than, like 70% ethanol solution, you're not going to have any issues with your labels at all. A few other things, there is an e-stop feature. So if you hit this over here at any time, this will stop the unit with whatever it's doing. A few other safety features is that the unit won't run with the door open. So as soon as you open the door, it's also like an e-stop feature. There's just little safety sensors on the bottom that indicate that the door has been opened. Another thing, so you can add tubes at a later date. You don't need to have the unit set up for the exact tubes you're using whenever you would order a unit. Down the road, if you decide to go to a different tube type, completely fine and easily added on at a later date. The last thing, so daily maintenance. There isn't really much daily maintenance to do. We suggest that every time you change out a roll of labels and ribbon, that you kind of give the unit just a little bit of a wipe down, wipe down the deck rack. There are some rollers in there that, it's good to take an alcohol wipe and wipe down, just because there is a chance that they can get a little bit, sticky from the label residue. And then there's also rollers in the print head that need wiped down, but that's very easy, and there's step-by-step directions on how to do that. So now that we're done with the live demo, I guess we can pass it over to questions if anybody has anything.
Yeah, so let's take a few minutes just to allow people to drop in their questions if they have any. I guess while we let people do that, Ryan, can you talk about, you talked about maintenance, but can you also talk about any service contracts that are available?
Yeah, so we do offer service contracts. The unit does come with a 1-year warranty. So, from the time that we ship it out and install it to you, the warranty starts. And then after that, we offer, service contracts that include anything from just a preventative maintenance visit once a year to a preventative maintenance visit with emergency service visits with, all parts included. So they're very extensive, and we do have some literature on that if you'd be interested to see it. And we do have service technicians that, are ready at a moment's notice to come out and, can take a call and help you over the phone, anything that you would need.
Awesome. Can you also talk about, is there an option to have this work in a more sterile environment?
So yes, there are a few different options. The first is there is a HEPA filter option that can be put onto the back of the unit. All that's going to do is it's going to be blowing, clean air into the unit to disperse dirty air outside. So it's not a completely sterile option just because you're going to be reaching inside, putting tubes, placing labels in the unit, but it does help, a little bit with the sterility. The other option is there is a VX2 short unit. So it's shorter than the original VX2. The dimensions of this VX2 here are 33 inches tall, 27 inches wide, and 14 inches deep. And we can show you that real quick. Sammy, could we go back to the webcam for a second?
Yes, 1 second. Okay.
So as you can see, this is the size of the unit here. It fits perfectly on a lab bench. And the doors only come out a little bit, so it's not like you're going to be walking into them every time if it's towards the edge of the bench. But the HEPA filter does sit on the back of the unit. Now the short unit is basically it's the same unit here, but the top is lowered, so the upper gantry, the gripper head is lower, so that it does have the option to fit into a hood if you have a hood large enough to fit it.
Awesome. Another question, what kind of labels do you use with the VX2?
So we do recommend using Scinomix's labels. They are tried and true and have been tested extensively. There are a ton of different sizes, anything from, a 1/4 inch up to 2-inch labels that can be applied to any tube sizes. Other labels have the ability to function on the VX2, but do need to be tested first. And lastly, there is the option to have pre-printed labels done. So the VX2 will only print in black and white. If you do need color, it is an option, but those would have to be pre-printed. And then, if you wanted your logo to be in color on the label, it can be done, and they'd be put on the VX2, and then you can also print more information on the labels as they come through the unit.
Okay, great. And then one other question, is it possible to work with multiple tube types with the same unit, like the same VX2?
Yes, it is. Not during the same run. Each run would have to be tube type specific, but let's say you wanted to do a run of micronic tubes, and then you wanted to switch to a 15 ml tube, that's completely fine for the next run. Currently, the standard VX2 comes with different size gripper fingers. So every time you're changing out to a different diameter tube, you would need to change out the gripper fingers, which isn't that hard at all. There's just 4 different gripper fingers, 2 screws each that need to be taken out and put back in. But they do also offer a universal gripper option. So the universal gripper works with everything from, that's a 0.5 ml PCR tube all the way up to a 50 ml conical. And so it just gives the user, a little bit more flexibility and not the time that it takes to change out the gripper fingers, and just a little bit more ease of use that's available. But if you're only using one tube and don't see yourself using, the standard gripper fingers are perfect for you.
All right, great. Well, I think those are all the questions. So just move to our last slide. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks for watching our webinar on automated labeling in the lab, and thank you to Ryan for showing us how the software works and also just showing us how the unit functions in action. So if you are interested in learning more about either the VX2 or any of the labelers that we have within our portfolio, I encourage you to reach out to us. You can send us an inquiry at info@nbsscientific.com, or you can chat with us online and we can answer any questions that you might have. But yeah, thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.